and welcome to the I Am Her Empowerment and Impact Summit for Career Women. And today, I, your host, Kourtney Coleman, is bringing you a great gift by the name of Miss Frances Myers. You are going to want to pay very good attention to this interview. Welcome, Miss Fran. How are you?
Welcome. I'm fine, and I send greetings from Colorado.
Wonderful, beautiful Colorado, which I've actually lived in before. 4 seasons in a day is for real. Allow me to introduce you to Miss Fran. Fran's background has led her, oh my goodness, precisely where she belongs. Her passion for hospice and the Conversation Project and an early career as a nursing home dietitian has led her to start a business around advanced directives, which we all need to have. And end-of-life advocacy. It is a confusing topic that we like to ignore. We don't like to talk about death. We don't like to talk about our wishes, but Miss Fran is here to help us to get our life together because we are her, the woman that takes care of our business. Welcome, Miss Fran.
Thank you. Glad to be with you all.
I am so curious. Well, from us talking earlier, you know how I feel about a couple of things, so I'm interested to see what you're going to tell me now. Tell us, who's got our back in this most important time of our lives where some people don't think about it, some people don't even like to talk about it because they think they're gonna start something, but there is one thing that's for sure: if you were born, you're gonna die, and we have to be able to talk about it.
You're right. So what's important, though, is to realize that your medical power of attorney is the person who has your back. Now, your medical power of attorney has so many different names, it's absolutely ridiculous. Oh. Your medical proxy, your medical spokesperson, your healthcare decision maker, your healthcare proxy, your medical power of attorney, your medical decision maker, and I honestly could go on. But what I think is most important is that it's just not only when you're dying that that's important. It's so important that during your life, you have somebody to speak for you in any time when you can't speak for yourself in an emergency. And I've been there 3 times.
Oh, wow.
I've had that experience 3 times when I was actually in a place where I was not conscious and I had to have other people make decisions for me, and I'm not old, I promise you.
That's scary.
Yeah. So although 50% of us or so have a time when we need someone to speak for us and make decisions for us, more often than not it is when we're older. But it can happen at any time, and when you think about the 3 names I'm going to throw out there, most of whom you'll recognize, those are young people. I'm going to say Karen Ann Quinlan, Nancy Cruzan, and Terry Schiavo. And Terry is, of course, the name that most people recognize because her experience being tube-fed in a nursing home for 15 years was all over Geraldo and Time Magazine and Life and Look and everybody. And she was 30 or so when she was no longer able to speak for herself. And because she didn't have anyone chosen as her spokesperson, and there was a family crisis over decisions, she was in a tube feeding for 15 years before she finally died.
Wow. Yeah. Not a funny situation, but I can't imagine the mental, the emotional, and the financial cost of that decision.
You're right, Kourtney. What I would tell you is that the legacy of those 3 young women is that we now, in 2018, but ever since 1990, actually have an opportunity to make some decisions around end of life. Before then, it was not even possible. And so now we have the opportunity and we don't take it. Oh. We ignore it. And the Terry Schiavo scenario could happen again. Hopefully it wouldn't in this day and age, but trust me, when there's horrible family dysfunction around decision making and nothing's in writing and nothing has been expressed specifically.
Mhm.
It's a mess, a mess. So we need to have somebody to have our back. Your medical power of attorney. There you go.
How do you choose one? It must be like the oldest person, or it's a great honor to be that person. I personally, from something recently in our family, I don't think it's an honor, but is that an honor or to be chosen? Like, okay, yay, I get to do it.
Yeah, you're right on there. No, it's not an honor, and it's a hard, hard job. There are decisions to be made potentially that are incredibly difficult. I always look at it as though they're at 4 different levels. The first level might be deciding on tests, non-invasive tests, second opinion, and then the next level might be deciding on surgery, deciding to put in a tube through the abdomen for feeding. The third level might be life support decisions, and the fourth, hospice, end of life things. So those are tough, tough decisions to think through. So you have to be able to choose a medical power of attorney who you believe would listen to you, understand you, ask questions, you tell them how you feel, kind of figure it out, realizing that as you age, your decisions are going to change. They have to change. At age 35, your wishes are going to be pretty different in many ways from what they might be at 65 or 85. So the person you choose needs to have a number of qualities. First, they should live fairly close if possible. Now, if the person you know is the right person lives in Alabama and you live in Colorado, that's okay because it's 2018 and we can communicate. We can get on Skype. We can. But quite frankly, there is nothing like having your eyes on somebody.
Right.
So that's the first thing. If they can be close by, great. The second thing is it shouldn't be somebody who can't stand up for you and can't talk to a doctor and question and ask for a second opinion. And there are a lot of people who are holdovers from the old days where doctors are gods and truly just listen to whatever one doctor says. And sometimes that's really in conflict with what you might want. And third, you have to be able to have somebody who can articulate your wishes and not articulate their own. So if you're choosing someone, on the other end of the spectrum, you might be a right to die person, they might be a right to life person. I mean, that's just the way to kind of describe it. And if they can't go to your end of the spectrum where you are and where you sit and what you believe in, then something, unless they can guarantee you that they're positively going to follow your wishes and honor your wishes, then they're the wrong person.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm. You have to have 2 backups as well. And that can be, yeah. So say the individual you've chosen is your spouse or your best friend. And what happens to you that puts you in the emergency room, unable to speak for yourself, happened to them as well, a car accident or something like that. Well, you're sunk if you don't have another person chosen. And quite frankly, some people have someone chosen and then, for example, grandma chooses grandpa and then grandpa loses his cognitive abilities and she doesn't remember that she has him listed first and she really needs to take him off. Shoot, those things need to be looked at and to realize that it's a fluid thing. Advance directives are fluid.
That's a good point, because it's just like when you're putting on your insurance a beneficiary and a secondary. And we need to make sure that we're looking at that. So we need to be looking at our advance directives too. Is it updated? If I change my mind about something, let me go back and check it. So that's very good. And it is true. You need a secondary. Wow. Okay. Should it be a group of people? Should you have like your own panel or, I could just see that being a fight.
Committees, that's what happens with dysfunctional families when you have, oh my gosh, it's just awful and people don't get over it. The first person chosen, the medical power of attorney, is the decision maker. You can weigh in, you can have a meeting among the three of you, the agent and the other two, the family, all that you want, but you're the person who spoke to, dealt with, has a copy of all the information, and that person has the ultimate decision making. If there's a family with a lot of dysfunction, and the reason I mentioned that is the Terry Schiavo family couldn't have been more dysfunctional, which is why she was on a tube feeding for 15 years. And had Terry had the forethought, and I sure as heck wouldn't have at age 30, but had she taken a video, for example, written a letter, done an audio of her wishes, knowing perhaps that her families, that the two ends of the family were never the tree was going to meet. If we had something like that in hand, that would never have happened. And so I honestly say to people who are older, who feel as though there's going to be a fracas, we don't want a fracas. So let's do an audio, let's do a video, and we could script something and you can say exactly what your wishes are. And those would be around life support, tube feeding, ventilation, dialysis, any number of things, and resuscitation. That would be mostly what that would be about. And truly, those aren't really things that come into play a whole lot with people's thinking when they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s.
That's true, unless something has happened recently and then they think, ooh, I better get my stuff. Because you're on this incline part of your life where you're just chugging along and you just think, oh, I have time.
And the nice thing about being in the world we're in is that when something happens, we often talk about it. So with the shootings and young people that we know having problems with drugs and things like that, and all the death around, if we can just have a conversation even with our loved ones, that's something like, I never want that. Oh my gosh, the way that happened, never, never. If there's even a good conversation, that'll count, to tell you the truth.
Oh, wow. That's good.
You should really have something in writing. But if Terry Schiavo had ever said anything, it probably would have held up in court, actually, in that circumstance.
Wow. If there was enough people to corroborate the same story, right?
Yeah.
Wow. What does the healthcare agent have to do?
The healthcare agent has to be up on what your wishes are, has to know you well, and has to be willing to be up on whatever this year is. Good idea to revisit it annually, particularly when there are changes. Someone's diagnosed with cancer, something awful happens, really time to revisit it. They also need to know what would happen if you did pass away. So the medical power of attorney's job, per se, ends at the time of the last breath. So at that point in time, there has to be knowledge of the person who's then going to take over with all of the rest of the responsibilities that come around cremation or burial, and where, and reaching out to everyone in the family and things. And so it's very important actually to have some up-to-date information on a regular basis. I have a document that goes into a great deal of detail about all of the things that the medical power of attorney has to do, but I don't want to make it sound like you should be paid for it because it's a full-time job. It's not, but it's a question of getting to know someone and feeling what their values are, and a good values assessment is a great thing to have as well. And I actually have one of them as well in my business.
Oh, wow. When you were talking, I saw have one person be the medical power of attorney, have the other person handle the affairs after, have the other person, be the person to handle the finance and stuff. So everybody gets their share in participating. It's not just logging all of that responsibility onto one person, which could be beyond overwhelming. I could just see handling all different phases is.
If you're an only child, it'll happen many times. It's a lot. It really is a lot, which means, boy, you better be prepared. Making a decision in an intensive care unit or an emergency room is very, very difficult. It's actually also very hard if, say, grandmom collapses on the floor and you call 911. You've got to know whether grandma wants to be resuscitated or not. And grandma needs to have thought about it and said something to somebody, and actually should have documentation about it, wear a bracelet. But only about 15% of people, I think, really have documented and have that hanging on their refrigerator. And that's because people don't really know how aggressive and how traumatic cardiopulmonary resuscitation is. What we know is what we saw on TV with just everybody walking out of the hospital.
Grey's Anatomy that my daughter's watching now, and whatever other TV show where it just looks like, oh, okay, just a little pump, just a little pump. And then once I talked to you and I saw that, and I was like, that's not looking like, you know, what she said. I'm like, I know you're sawing through a bone and you're open, but you really got to open some. Yeah, no.
I love your description.
I mean, they were like internal saw, and I'm like, okay, so that's the sternum, and you, to get to the heart, you got to move the bone, and they have these big, they look like bridge holders, like it's a dam with your chest all cracked open, and I'm like,
well, I hope your audience is not listening to what you're saying, because it's not exactly accurate. I hate to tell you.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what we see on TV.
Yeah, well, shoot. It's very true. And starting in the 90s with Chicago Hope and Rescue 911, the success rate in CPR on TV was crazy. It was between 65 and 75% based on which show it was. And I know that's true because there were a bunch of medical students who had nothing better to do than to watch every single episode, dividing them up among different medical students and figuring out how many episodes CPR was done, and among them, how many people were great walking out of the hospital with their purses. And it was 65 to 75%, and that could not be farther than the truth. Wow. But the American Medical Association and some other organizations went right after the directors and the producers of those shows and said, cease and desist. You are doing a huge disservice.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And actually that continues to this day. I know hardly anyone who hasn't been immediately involved in cardiopulmonary resuscitation. And I don't mean on Resusci Annie, the rubberized gal that we learn CPR on. I know very few people who understand what cardiopulmonary resuscitation is, what it looks like, what it can do, and what it can't do. And I will tell you, people think that it's here to give you immortality, and it isn't. The success rate is very, very, very low.
Wow. What kind of decisions should we make in advance?
We need to think ahead about what we would do in case of dementia. So ahead of time, as you probably know, early onset Alzheimer's can come way too early in life. And if you haven't thought out what you might want and documented it, you're going to be in the hands of potentially a facility where the rules wouldn't let you do what you might want. So let me take a step forward. Although it's not right now clear whether these wishes that you would have at this point would actually hold up in court, there are a lot of us putting together and utilizing advanced directives around dementia that say, if I do not want to eat, do not cajole me and do not force me and do not put a tube in me. So working in nursing homes and assisted livings, I've seen the huge effort being taken to try and get people to eat. And quite frankly, when your cognition is good, when you have capacity, if you say, you know what, I don't want anyone to cajole me and force me like that. So in a document, you might say something like, if I am spitting out food, clenching my teeth, not wanting to eat, turning my head, please do not make me eat, which can lead to weight loss, which can lead to the health department saying, what's going on? You can imagine how that snowballs. But near the end of life, many people stop eating or reduce the amount of food that they're taking. And voluntary stopping of eating and drinking is legal in every state. So that's one thing. The other part of that is not, for example, giving me antibiotics or putting in a pacemaker or doing treatments and procedures that are just going to lengthen my life. So there are people who, when they get very, very far along in the process, would want an exit. And although this may sound very abrupt and awful and something you would have never thought of, my grandfather and George Washington died of pneumonia, and it was called the old man's angel, I think, something like that at any rate. So it's being able to allow a natural death, which is a term that's, I think, a very important term. So that would be to say, we don't have to treat everything. We don't have to be aggressive with everything when you are near the end of life or when you are very advanced in Alzheimer's. And so that's something. And the other piece of it is what I just mentioned. And that is, there are terms that we don't know that make it easier to talk about end of life. One of them is allow natural death. The term equals do not resuscitate, but do not resuscitate sounds like you're keeping me from something really important. Something that's going to save me and I'm going to walk away in great shape, which is probably as far away from the truth as possible. So I have a mother-in-law who at age 92 wanted to have resuscitation. She feels like she's exercised and kept herself healthy, and she's 92 and she's got heart troubles. She has osteoporosis. There's no reason to think that she would do real well. She also has some cognition loss. And so quite frankly, I'm her agent. So for me, knowing that she wanted to have CPR was really, really hard. But every 6 months when I would revisit it and ask her, so is cardiopulmonary resuscitation still what you'd like to have? And she would always say yes. Well, when I learned about allow natural death, sounds kind of like Vitamin Cottage or going to Sprouts or Trader Joe's or someplace. It's just sounds like 2018. So I said to her, so Emily, it's 6 months down the road and I just wanted to revisit with you. So if you were really at the final chapter and really near the end, is what you would want to be made comfortable, to be kept warm and have somebody here to hold your hand, to have your sons brought in to be with you and be kept comfortable? Is that what you'd really like, a calm atmosphere? She went, oh, yes. Well, all right. That is do not resuscitate. That is not coming in and doing 100 to 120 deep chest compressions per minute and all of the other chemical and physical things, putting in a ventilator, putting in breathing tubes, giving electric shock, all those kinds of things. It's allowing somebody who's passing away of natural causes to have that natural death and keep them out of pain, if at all possible, and keep them comfortable. Allow natural death. It's a good term.
Two totally different pictures with the change of words. Amazing. Once I choose someone, then what do I do?
Well, once you choose somebody, as life goes on, you have to be willing to choose someone else. Okay, you really do. You have to be very clear in your own mind that so-and-so no longer has capacity. So-and-so has moved. I've had a falling out with so-and-so. That person is sick. I don't want to put it on them. That's one of the things I think that's the most important. So you're bringing in somebody new and it's a good chance to review all of your documents. So I would say that's the most important piece. You're going to have to redo this. and nobody wanted to do it the first time. So now you have to do it a second time.
As much as necessary.
Right.
Wow. What are the most important things to talk about with my family?
Well, it's really important for your family to know your general values, which would include things like, would I rather be pain-free, even if I'm kind of blotto and don't know what's going on? Or would I want to have some pain so that I could be aware and see my family and be with them? So on a scale from 1 to 5, where do you fit on that? Now that would be an example of something. It's a values piece. Another one might be, would you be okay if you had to go to a nursing home? Or that's one end of the spectrum. Or I want to be at home when I pass away. The thing about that question, and actually all of those kinds of values questions that I use in my work, are that if you are black and white about everything, you're leaving your family, your loved ones, thinking, oh no, I have to keep you at home, and you're in such a condition that you really need to be in a nursing home. I can't manage this care, but I promised them. And we all hear that kind of stuff. Nursing homes are incredibly expensive also, so staying at home might be a great option, except the extra work and stress, and if you don't have the money to pay for caregivers to come in. So this whole balancing act is really difficult. And I think sometimes when we make decisions that are black and white, we tie the hands of people. It's the same thing with when you do your formal directives. I'm of the opinion that if we know our medical power of attorney well enough, and they know us and our values well enough, that we ought to give them some leeway. And there's an opportunity to do that on the documents. If I had had a time when I might have been put on a tube feeding or a ventilator at any time in my life up until about a year ago, I would not have been put on that because it said very clearly, I don't ever want them. And then I heard about someone, actually I know him now, his name is Tom, and he was in a home invasion where his wife was shot to death. He was shot and injured very significantly, huge blood loss. Before they airlifted him to the hospital, he really almost died, but he was young. He was only 52 when this happened. So at the hospital, they knew, shoot, he's 52. We've stopped his bleeding. I think the best thing to do would be for us to get ready to do lots of surgery on his face. It was all facial stuff. They had to do multiple surgeries, but he came around. And after all of those surgeries, he'd been on a tube feeding, he'd been on a ventilator. He had to be because of the massive reconstruction that had to be done. But when it comes right down to it, he's now engaged to my girlfriend.
Oh, wow.
Right. But he was 52 also. He wasn't 80. He wasn't 85 or 90. He was 52. And so the medical staff was able to say, whoa, all right, this is where we're going. And he didn't have anything in writing. If it had been me, I had in writing, I never want to be on a tube feeding and I never want to be on a ventilator because I've seen too much. And as a dietitian, I tube fed way too many people too long. It was back in the 80s. So for me, that was an aha moment that was a really important one. So I've changed my tune about that to being able to not be, again, black and white on this, to be able to say to somebody, I trust your judgment. And so with the help of the medical professionals and their advice and your gut sense about what I would want, I would like you to make those decisions.
What happens if I want to die at home?
Wow. You need to have some support. You need to think about that ahead of time. It's really important to know what hospice is. Hospice is such a gift, and it does allow you to die at home most often. And it is something that we're allergic to. I know that when we ask people if they would take hospice, they look shocked. And then if you ask them about palliative care, they say they want that because they don't know how to spell it and they don't know what it is, but it sounds better. And the truth is that palliative care is not as rich a service. It's not well reimbursed. There's the word. Not well reimbursed by Medicare or any insurances, whereas hospice is paid for by Medicare and any other insurance on the planet. And quite frankly, the ability for them to keep you managed in terms of your pain, to be a huge support to your family is great. Now, that doesn't mean everyone qualifies for hospice. They don't. You need to have a life-limiting disease. And if you had the kind of looking glass where you could look and say, well, I think this person's going to live X amount of time, you'd say the number would be 6 months. But no one has that. A lot of times people are so far off. Doctors can be very far off the mark. We all know of people who have been told they've got 6 months and they live a week. I mean, that just happens in life. But the qualifiers are a life-limiting disease and someone who looks as though if the trajectory of their disease process goes as might be expected, they might live another 6 months. There's no cutoff, really. Where I worked, we had people who were on hospice, one person as long as 4 years, because her decline continued. If your decline stops and you start getting better, we kick you right off, and then you can come back whenever you might need it again. When I say kick you off, I mean that in the kindest way. It just means you graduate. That's a term that's used. So that's the first thing I would tell you is if you want to die at home, the ways that hospice can help you are so broad. The second thing would be to realize that having help is probably the best and most important thing. And help could be in the form of family and friends, but it can also be a home health company and some home care. There are great people who can come in your home. Home health is covered by insurance, particularly Medicare. Home health would be a nurse, PT, OT, any of those professional services coming to your home, a certain amount of days and times and hours that are ordered by your physician. Home care is non-skilled, and they can be just terrific at helping with activities of daily living and things of that nature. So there's help out there. If you can't afford that, though, you need to have some support people as well. And that might take the form of people from your church or something like that. But dying at home also means not getting rushed off in a hurry to the emergency room and the intensive care unit. And that's what happens a lot to our elders. So there are a couple of things to think about. One of them is in many cities, docs who will come to your home are becoming very popular. It's just a terrific thing. We've got doctors in the Denver area and in the Boulder area driving around in little cars, and they're actually physicians who are going to homes or nurse practitioners going to homes. Insurance is paying for it just as they would if you had to traipse to the doctor's office. Well, traipsing to the doctor's office many times is very difficult. And in terms of staying home and being comfortable and having it also be easier on your spouse, being able to take advantage of a service like that is wonderful. Another piece of that is to understand that the term slow medicine is a great term. It's one of those that makes us think about what it is that our doctors, whatever professionals we're talking to, are recommending and thinking them through more clearly rather than saying, oh, okay, I need to have a pacemaker put in. All right, let's do that right away. And what are the implications of that? What is that going to do to you in terms of the fact that you might know that your days are numbered? The arc of your life is heading downward toward the end, and putting in a pacemaker. What is that going to do? Plus, it's a surgery. Surgeries on older people in particular never work out well cognitively. And that never word I should never, ever say. So I'm going to get rid of that. But typically, being under general anesthesia is not a great way to be when you're older. And so in terms of staying home, if you think about slow medicine, do I really need that surgery? Do I really need all these interventions? Do I need to go to the doctor every 2 weeks? Do I need to have this visit to the intensive care unit through the emergency room, which means really allowing a natural death, staying home, maybe having a doctor or a nurse come in, somebody from a home care company, hospice, a home health company, excuse me, being willing to be at home and get your pain managed, being willing to call the doctor and say, got a situation here, can you order something? Might work, might not work, but whatever you can do to kind of eliminate all that running around and rushing around. But then at the very end, if somebody doesn't want resuscitation, to be willing to not call 911 or to have the documents in place in order to hand the first responders so that, quite honestly, your wishes are honored. If you have nothing in writing about resuscitation, I have news for you. If you call 911, the rescue squad folks all those first responders are supposed to do everything they can. And everything they can is a litany, as long as your arm, of things that they've got up their sleeves that they can do. It's not just what we think of with Resusci Annie and the 100 to 120 compressions per minute. It has everything to do with many other things. So if that's not what you want, try and make sure your family knows not to call 911. Try and make sure that whatever caregivers you have don't call 911, because you could easily have someone in who's just taking care of you while your wife heads out to go grocery shopping, and that individual doesn't realize that they really shouldn't call 911. And cardiopulmonary resuscitation is never started until you have no breath and no pulse, which is the definition of having passed away, having died. So you're talking about bringing somebody back.
Wow. Making sure the caregiver knows. That's important. What if the person does pass away at home? How do they call someone? Who do they call if that happens?
Right, because if you call 911, unless you have documentation in order that's required in your state, because every state has their own rules about things like this. But if you call 911, even if they've passed away the way they wanted to, if it hasn't been very long, they're very likely to try and do CPR on the individual, at which time, if they are able to get a breath back and a pulse back, they're going to end up in the emergency room and then the intensive care unit, because that's the procedure once you've had CPR. So really, it makes a lot more sense to call your doctor's office.
Oh, okay.
And the one thing is, if you call your coroner's office, I think it depends on what county, what state you're in. They're very likely to tell you that you have to call police. You have to call 911 first. In which case, I hate to say it, but I wouldn't rush to do that, because the longer it's been since the individual passed away, the more chance that the peace will be able to be there. So if you can do this, if you have the ability to hold the hand and be there and talk, we don't die all at once, every cell. You've got somebody who's there and who's warm and wants your hand held, I believe. So I would do that. I would realize that the last sense also that goes is your hearing. I remember an instance in my family, and I'm going to say this because I don't think they're ever going to hear this. When my father-in-law was passing away, when my brother-in-law came in the room, he just exclaimed about how awful he looked. It was all I could do not to jump him, because that's something that he heard. That's something my father-in-law heard, because the hearing is still going on.
Wow.
My poor brother-in-law just took it on the chin. Sorry about that.
Let's see, what other questions? I'm just so into the conversation. The questions are just like, what? We have questions. Did you say hospice? Hospice in there. Lots of people are scared of hospice. So, that's what I want to ask you. You said palliative care versus hospice. What is the other one? You said some people, it sounds good, and they don't know what it is. Can you explain to us what it is? Because I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. hospice is an umbrella term. And under the umbrella of hospice is palliative care. Now, palliative care is management of symptoms, and you do not have to be on the trajectory toward the end of life. So, for instance, I had a girlfriend who, you know something? I just said this backwards. Can we stop and re-record this?
No, I'll just cut it out. So just pause,
Okay.
so I'll have a blank and then we can.
Okay. So palliative care is an umbrella term that is around managing symptoms. And hospice, under that umbrella, is about managing symptoms and care and the family and your life as you are heading toward the end. So with hospice, as I mentioned before, you have to be kind of in that window where it looks like you're approaching the end of your life. So it's about management of pain and symptoms and emotions and helping with figuring out the funeral service things. I mean, I am floored at the extent of things that hospice did. When my father-in-law went in hospice care, the social worker who came to visit said, just about first words out of her mouth were, "So do you happen to have long-term care insurance?" And my mother-in-law said, "Yes, I do." She said, "Hand me the policy, will you?" And there was a wait of, I believe, 60 days before it would kick in. So in other words, you can be very ill, but your long-term care insurance that you've been paying for how many years isn't going to kick in until you've been sick enough to need these kinds of services for over 60 days. So social worker picks
Okay,
up the
wait,
phone.
stop. Wait, because I got insurance. Wait. Okay.
Long-term care insurance is different from regular insurance. So long-term care insurance is a kind of policy that will kick in when you are near the end of life, and it allows you to have home care, having people come in to help you and to help manage what's happening for you. Again, to bring in nurses and people to help you without you having to pay for them out of pocket because you've already been paying into this insurance plan.
I've heard term and life insurance. I've never heard of what you're talking about. Why are they not saying this to people? Like, when am I supposed to go get this policy? When I'm 80? What? There's another level that we don't know of.
Right. Long-term care insurance is a piece of the puzzle that I've never jumped into myself. It's one of those things where it'll really help you in terms of what care needs you have near the end, because as I was mentioning, it's expensive to have someone come in and do the activities of daily living and the other things that'll really help you if you want to die at home, for example. But long-term care insurance is an insurance that wants to be sure that it doesn't pay out until you've really proven how sick you are over time. I guess that would be a way of describing it, and I'm not an insurance salesperson. I just know that the truth is that there's a wait on almost all of them, if not all of them. There's a wait. So the social worker picked up her phone and called to start the clock running. So day one that he was put in hospice care, she called the insurance company and said, "Gerald Wells," oh, probably shouldn't have said his name, huh? is in hospice care now. We'd like to get the clock ticking. And quite frankly, I'm really glad that I got him in hospice care early. He was in hospice care for 6 months before he passed away. And I'm glad that I was proactive about that. Luckily, 60 days later, he was at a point where he truly did need to have someone come in and help him shower and shave and do catheter care and things. He was well enough to manage all those things. He was an independent individual, but after 60 days, it just was such a struggle for him. It was just such a welcome thing for someone to come in on a regular basis, and that it was paid for through the long-term care insurance. Had the social worker not said that, they would have never gotten any use whatsoever out of the long-term care insurance, because if she'd have called after 60 days, And then the clock started ticking for another 60 days. You can see that there would have been a big waste of their money, which would be very, very sad.
Wow.
I know a lot of people say, why would I want a social worker? Well, you have no idea how many good things a social worker can do for you in hospice. And she's just one person, he or she is just one person on the team. There's a nurse, there's a certified nursing assistant, there's a social worker and a chaplain, and then a medical director who doesn't typically come to the home, but is there to answer questions, write orders, etc. The nurse is absolutely a key part to this whole process. And the nurse is going to help manage symptoms, help be in touch with the doctor when it's necessary, and truly a godsend, because also a nurse is available around the clock. So we had to call several times to the hospice at 2 and 3 in the morning because we had an issue that needed help. 24/7, 365 response, whether they have to come out or not. They're on the end of the phone. So that's the nurse. Certified nursing assistant, amazing. All those activities of daily living, coming in multiple times a week, getting to know somebody so well they trust you, being willing to put your hair in curlers and make you look beautiful, or do whatever, and allow the wife, for example, to go out and go, I always have them going grocery shopping, go out for coffee with their friends, and the CNA stay with them for a little while. It's awesome. And then some people don't feel like they want a chaplain, but I can tell you the chaplain can be your best friend, number one. And number two, might not be that the patient wants it, but the family wants it. And that was the case in our family. So it's a great team. It's a wonderful team.
Wow.
That's hospice, which is under the umbrella of palliative care. In palliative care, many of these people could be in hospice care. Quite frankly, the trajectory of their disease process is such that nobody would expect that they would outlive 6 months. However, they choose palliative because you can say I'm in palliative care and it doesn't sound like you're going to die tomorrow, which is not what hospice is anyway. If that's what happens and you get in hospice that late, you just missed out on tremendous service for 6 months or longer. But with palliative care, when my girlfriend went in palliative care, she was having terrible symptoms, just symptoms that she could not manage. And it didn't matter how many times she went to the doctor. It seemed like they could not get a handle on it. And I said to her, you need to go to a palliative care specialist. And she called her doctor, who said, oh, no, you don't need one. And he called her back 5 minutes later and said, you know what? You do. She went to a palliative care doctor and they admitted her to the hospital. And the palliative care service at the hospital finally was able to manage her. And so from then on, they had a handle on it and were able to manage her pain. But it actually took being in the hospital. So it's about symptom management, not necessarily always pain, but symptom management is what palliative care is about. And symptom management as you're nearing the end of life is what hospice is about.
Wow.
Was that clear?
Yes. Thank you for clearing that up. Got my education today. Wow. There are more things to just the medical power of attorney, as you have so well informed me today. So I thank you. Should we see an attorney to get things set up? How do we go about getting this set up? What do we do?
You don't need an attorney and you don't need a notary.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought you needed a notary or something.
No, it would depend. I don't know that for sure in every single state, but I know the states that I've studied are different. So for example, in New Jersey, your living will has to be signed. No, I just lied. Your medical power of attorney, which is called a healthcare representative, has to have 2 witnesses to your signature. That's not necessary in Colorado at all. The living will and some of the other documents have qualifiers in all the different states. But to my knowledge, there's not a state where you have to have an attorney do it. And quite frankly, I mean, nothing against attorneys, but they are not healthcare professionals, most of them. Some of them, I guess, are doctors and lawyers and making a lot of money, but they charge a lot. And if you go to somebody who is an advanced care planning specialist, who has spent a great deal of time working on this one thing and has a lot of healthcare background and understands, you're going to get walked through this much much more thoroughly. And there are always nuances that aren't picked up if you just get a few documents. If you just go online and pull off the medical power of attorney and pull off a living will and think you're done, there are really a lot of other parts of that.
I was going to ask you that. Do you just go search online then and say like some type of, there's a legal website, I think it's LegalZoom, and the other one's just, oh, let me get a medical power of attorney and then that's it? Is that how this goes? Or?
So you were talking about the document, right? Because finding somebody to be your medical power of attorney is really hard if you don't have one. And I will tell you, I do it for a few people. I don't do it for many. But so I think you're talking about the document. Those documents are in fact available. You can get your state document. You can do that. There are people though who make a living doing this. There are people who have really dedicated themselves. I personally have put together a portfolio that has what you would need in it and me talking, although it's not my voice, it's me having written the nuances. So that's a way too. And good to meet with somebody if you can. Skype with somebody. See how nice this is?
Yes. Thank you. Oh my goodness gracious. I feel like I just need to go cry in my bed just to release some stuff and then just be able to write down what I want and how I want it to be.
Well, you can't just, I would just tell you, you probably can't just sit down and start writing. You need some kind of an outline. You need to have
just get it out, just for me to get it out, and then I can go get the documents and get all that together. But just from being so full, just for me to get it out.
I have a values inventory piece that's really good. It asks the kinds of questions that you need to think about before you do any of the documents.
Okay. Are you going to be able to give that to us as a gift for the summit, ladies?
Is that what you want? The
Please.
value?
Yeah.
I think that's a good one. I think that's a good one. I could pick any number of them, but the values, that's a good thing because it's a good place to start.
Okay.
It truly is.
Okay, well, great. So there you go, ladies. Now we know what the gift's going to be. It's going to be about assessing our values for what we want at this crucial time in our life. So how can the ladies find you online?
Well, they should go to my website and then click on gift. There's nothing like a gift, right?
Nothing like a gift. So what is your website?
www.center, and then the word for, not the number four, FOR, and then advance. It's not advanced, it's advance. You do it in advance. So it's ADVANCE, careplanning.org.
Okay, Center for Advanced Care Planning.org.
That's correct. Awesome. You're doing advanced directives. Okay. Is such a weird term. It's just got that legalese in it, but it means in advance you're writing your instructions, but put that legal thing in it, and it's advanced directives. It's not advanced. Just saying that because if you can't get on my website, you'll never get my gift.
And we need the gift. We really need the gift. We have gotten our life together for this end of care. I thank you so much for educating me. I thank you. I greatly appreciate it. Now I won't be so black and white. And I actually mentioned that to my daughter. I said, I'm going to talk to this lady and she's going to, try to convince me that I shouldn't be so black or white. And I said, well, maybe I should include y'all in my plans and not just tell you what I want. So I will definitely be approaching this from a different viewpoint. I thank you so very much. Are there any closing words you want to say, or are you okay?
Oh, I'm good. I just want to show this pretty turquoise thing. That's a portfolio that will be available. So when you get your gift, if you want to go deeper, I've put together a very thorough piece that would help you from start to finish.
Okay. Thank you so very much, Miss Friend. I am forever grateful.
Thank you, Kourtney. I'm glad that we were able to share this with you and all of your friends.
Awesome. That is it for this interview with Miss Fran. I am Kourtney Coleman. Please go take care of your affairs as soon as you possibly can. And until next time, stay true to the real you. I'm Kourtney Coleman.